Hey everyone, welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Deppen, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2022 Best of Note survey, where the results just came out. So this is a survey run every year by Fred and Tracy Rui, and what they do is they run down different categories of vendors or different players in the note space and let people vote on who they think are the best. But before running that down, I wanted to just give you some updates on the market and some things that I've been up to lately. I know, apologize, it's been a little while since I released a podcast. Within really been pretty busy with my own portfolio. At this point, I think I got 7 different assets that are going through various states of foreclosure. I had one just in the past week that sold at foreclosure auction, which was nice. Now I'm just waiting for the buyer to fully fund and get paid for that. Made a couple of new acquisitions in recent months. Haven't been too busy on the acquisition front lately, mostly working my existing portfolio for a variety of reasons I can get into. The market overall has been really interesting. Definitely seeing a lot more assets for sale in the last month or so in particular. Um, but because I'm personally not in acquisition mode right this minute, I will be very shortly after the first of the year. Um, I haven't been out there making offers on those, and some of them have had suggested pricing, and some of them haven't. So what I've seen so far is more assets available for sale. I don't know that the pricing has necessarily adjusted much. One of the reasons I'm waiting a little bit before flipping back over into acquisition mode is I think we're going to continue to see more assets, hitting the market in the coming months, but I think we're going to see the pricing come down as well. As the economy changes and as market conditions change, there's typically a little bit of a lag between the change in the market conditions and then the change in behavior of all of the players. So I'm giving that a few more months to settle out, and then I'm going to flip over into acquisition mode. The reason I think we're seeing more assets and the reason I think we'll continue to see more and see pricing adjust is just the state of the economy. As I've talked a little bit in some of my newsletters, we've had rising interest rates, high inflation, a lot of predictions of double dip recessions coming next year. And so we'll have to see what actually happens. Economic predictions are really tough. Um, but all signs seem to point towards some kind of a recession, which is good for distressed note buyers. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time for all of that to unfold. I've been talking to a lot of my friends about this lately, and one of the comments I've always had is this is one of the weirdest looming recessions I've ever seen. Typically, when you get into really bad economic times, it seems to be like a blind side, right? So like the dot-com bust, and then the financial crisis, a lot of people didn't really see coming. Now, people might say in hindsight, oh, well, that was obviously a bubble and whatever, but the market was obviously not preparing for those events. This is really weird scenario, and that it seems like the whole economy, especially large companies, are preparing for recession. We've seen Facebook do layoffs, Amazon's battening down the hatches. You see other large companies doing things and preparing. So it's really weird in that everybody's like gearing up for this recession that hasn't really hit yet. And in the meantime, if I go to Starbucks, there's like a line out the door. You try to go to a restaurant, it's hard to get a seat. A lot of businesses still having difficulty hiring. So this is definitely a weird, unique situation. But I think at the end of the day, this will we'll continue to see some more opportunities and notes coming forward. And this is something I'll talk about a lot more as we get into 2023. In one of my recent newsletters, I talked about some of my advice for preparing for this. Um, and outline how there are also a lot of predictions of housing prices falling over the course of 2023. I think that's likely. I mean, I don't think this is going to be like a financial crisis where it's going to be big, but with interest rates heading up, it's going to be really hard to see housing prices go up. So best case scenario is they probably stay flat. I think that we'll see them decrease some amount. So based on that, right, what we have is a lot of loans out there where the borrowers have significant equity. So I think those loans that were originated in years past where borrower has a lot of equity, those borrowers are going to have a big incentive to keep paying. So those performing notes that were originated a while ago, I would expect for the most part to continue to perform. If you're looking at buying recently originated notes, I would tread a little more lightly there, right? So you're going to have to do a little more homework, a little more due diligence to understand how you're going to fare in scenarios where housing price, the value of the underlying collateral could drop up to 20%. So I'd be a little bit careful with those. Doesn't mean don't buy them. It just means be more careful, adjust pricing as needed. And then the third thing that I've really been acting on is if housing prices are going to go down a little bit and you have a note that's distressed where you have the ability to foreclose, you're probably better off doing it now than waiting a year when the value of the underlying asset that you get back might be worth 20% less. Who knows? That's why I have so many assets in foreclosure right now. And it's going to get really interesting for borrowers, right? Because a lot of the borrowers are maybe hanging on through the fingernails through COVID, where there was stimulus, which is long gone. We've really had a weirdly good economic environment the last couple years, despite COVID. So those borrowers that struggled during that period, could really struggle in 2023. So we'll have to see how this all pans out. I'll be obviously watching it very closely. The other thing I've been working on is gearing up for new content for next year. I know, like with the podcast, I've been fairly hit or miss this past year, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But what I'm doing is I'm putting in the can a lot of really great content so I can deliver that on a really consistent basis throughout 2023. So between now and the end of the year, especially, really doing a lot on content creation to get a lot of stuff in the hopper so we can put that out. So some of it will be, more general note investing topics that people are interested in hearing about. Also, a lot more interviews, and I'll be getting a lot of people on here that I have not had on in the past. So be looking forward to that. That's definitely going to be one of my focuses the next couple of weeks. I got a big list of content that I want to put out that I think is going to be really good over the course of next year. And then, the other thing, I don't really do it as an end of the year thing anymore. It's almost continuous, but I'll be brushing up all of my goals and planning for 2023. I'm not going to really deep dive on those in this podcast, but I'm really excited about that. I'm personally rolling into the year and really a better place than I've ever been, just from my personal life, health, financial standing, like everything. It's kind of I don't want to jinx myself, but I'm walking into the year in a good position. So trying to think about how I can make things better in the new year. So with that, I am going to get into reviewing our best of notes list. So for those of you who are watching the video version of this, I'll share my screen, but I'll be able to talk to all of this if you're just listening on audio. So again, the best of notes is a list that comes out every year, put out by Fred and Tracy Rui, where note investors can nominate vendors, nominate people for various categories, and then everyone votes on them. So I'll go over the winners in some of these groups and give, my take on some of these as well, some of the good and bad of these various vendors. Another highlight to look forward to more in 2023 is me calling out bad behavior on the part of individuals and vendors. That's something I've kind of hesitated to do in the past, but I'll be doing a lot more of. In fact, there'll be some podcasts coming up on one vendor in particular that has some deep issues. Without further ado, let's get into the first category. And so the first one is the best national note buyer for brokering, and the winner was First National Acceptance Company, also known as FNAC. Had them on the podcast at some point earlier this year. And I can totally understand why they won. I'm pretty sure I voted for them. So First National Acceptance, they're out of Lansing, Michigan, I believe. The thing is, when you sell to them, their underwriting standards are pretty high. So a lot of times when I've sold notes, I couldn't sell to them just because it didn't meet their standards necessarily. But when they do, they generally pay more than anyone else. They have really good systems and processes for providing quotes, closing on deals. So whenever I need to sell a note, if I can sell it to FNAC, I do. So definitely some folks I recommend using. Some of the other people on the list, Grand Bank, who I've never sold to, but I have heard good things about. And then also Colonial Funding Group. I didn't actually realize Colonial bought notes, but I'm pretty sure they would be good folks to go to. It's run by Bob Repass. I've had him on the podcast before, and they're folks that I trust. The second category, and this one surprised me a tiny bit. Well, not really. Is the best note listing exchange platform, and the winner here was notesdirect.com. So this is through basically Colonial and Eddie Speed's Note School, which I have not bought from them directly before. What's really nice about Notes Direct is you can just sign up, go on there, download their list of notes. They have pricing. Everything's put together. It's really easy to do. Um, the reason I haven't bought from them before is generally, especially if you're not part of Note School, their pricing hasn't been the most favorable. So I've never found anything there that I closed on. But it is very well organized, good operation. I trust Bob Repass and Eddie Speed a lot, and so I feel like they're not going to try to sell you a bad note or anything like that. And if for some reason something weird happened, I'm pretty sure that they would make it right for you. Um, where this was a little bit surprising was PaperStack didn't win. And I think the big difference between PaperStack and Notes Direct is on PaperStack, right? You're buying generally from individuals, sometimes smaller funds. Um, so there's a little more breadth of opportunity on PaperStack, but the challenge that I've had a little bit, especially when selling notes, is a lot of times the buyers on there are kind of flaky. You're just dealing with individuals who are maybe offering on their first note, and sometimes they get cold feet and back out. And so that's kind of it's not really an issue specific to PaperStack, but just a general issue across the board. So I plan on having Brett Berkey and company back on the podcast again from PaperStack in 2023 to talk about like their business and kind of where things are with them. The one on here I have not used, but I would watch out for is PreREO.com. They're affiliated with George Newberry and HP Servicing, which I will talk about a little bit later. I had some serious issues with AHP earlier this year, and I'm actually going to dedicate some podcasts to that. That's going to be part of my calling out bad vendors. So just knowing how the ownership behaved in some other scenarios, I would be a little cautious with that one. The best self-directed IRA company. The winner here was Quest Trust. I use Quest Trust for my self-directed IRA. I think I've had that account for probably 5 years or so, and they've been pretty good, pretty solid. Um, if you talk to people about their experiences with self-directed IRA companies, there's no like perfect self-directed IRA company. Some of them are flat out horrific. With Quest overall, I've had a good experience. I've had a couple hiccups here and there, nothing too major. It's always a challenge wherever you go with these, but all in all, Quest has been good for me. Equity Trust is on here as well. Equity Trust is probably historically the self-directed IRA company that's done the most with notes. And I've seen them be hit or miss. So I've never had an account there, but I've had investors who have invested funds with me through their equity trust IRA, and that's definitely been, kind of hit or miss as well. Sometimes they're real great about funding and the transaction's smooth. I've had a few transactions through equity trust where they've acted like they've never done a note deal before, which is kind of weird. So they had a big laundry list of self-directed IRA companies on here. And then I think Quest is a solid choice, although, do your own homework. There's no perfect self-directed IRA company. The Best Note Servicing Company. So this is one that I always have a lot of thoughts on loan servicers, and the winner was FCI Lender Services. And I can see why. I think this makes a lot of sense. I started using FCI some time back. I have a pretty decent number of notes there, and they've been, very solid. What I like about FCI is they've been in business a long time, and they have a lot of really solid systems and processes in place. And so they make things pretty early. One of the things I've talked about on the podcast in the past is my frustration with some loan servicers where I feel like I got to like relentlessly follow up to get them to do things they should have already done. Haven't really had to do that with FCI, and the pricing is reasonable, so that's been really good. The other one on this list that did not win, but I would recommend is BiFi. So this was a company started by Chris Seveny, who's full disclosure is a friend of mine. I think I got 5 or 6 notes there now. Um, they've been expanding this, they're a relatively new company. They've been expanding the number of states that they're licensed in. I'm not sure where they are now, but I know they've been, doing that, expanding that rapidly. And I've had very good experiences there. So they're very responsive. They proactively tell me when things are going on. So between FCI and BiFi, I would say I've had very similar experiences over the past year. Both of them have performed really well. Um, AHP servicing is on this list. So I bought a couple notes earlier this year. They were serviced at AHP. I decided to leave them there so I could try out their services. And I'm going to do at least one podcast that details the problems, but it was a complete shit show. It took me literally months to get those loans transferred. It took me another couple months to actually get them to send me money for the payments that were coming in. I have about 60 or 80 back and forth with emails with them, just trying to get them to do basic things. And I even, included George Newberry, the president, directly in those communications, and he did not seem too interested. So my advice is to stay the hell away from HP. They've also had a lot of employee turnover, and I don't know what's going on under the covers there, but it is not anything good, and I won't hesitate to shout that from the rooftops. So those are the the loan servicers. There are a couple other ones on here that I've never even heard of before. Moat Note Servicing, Lake City, some of these other ones. So those I don't have experience with. Yeah, so there you go. There's some of the loan servicers. Maybe next year I'll do a whole podcast and kind of deep dive on some of the differences between these, because some of these are more like full service servicers. Others, you're a little more on your own. All right. Now, next category is best note servicing and tracking software. And this is one I don't really, I don't use note servicing and tracking software, so I don't have a whole lot of comments. The winner was the Mortgage Office. And from what I understand, this software is generally used by actually like loan servicers themselves. So that's a little bit outside the scope of what I can comment on, because I depend on my loan servicers to do this stuff for me. Then we get to the bestseller finance mortgage loan originator, and the winner was Call the Underwriter, run by Max Bailey. I've had him on the podcast before, and I can definitely vouch for Call the Underwriter. They've originated a number of seller finance notes. For me, they have really clean processes in place. What I like is they have a package they'll give you that says, here's what you do to originate a loan, step 1, step 2, step 3, and it works really well. The other ones on the list I have not used, so I can't really comment on. Texas Pride Lending, I've never used, but I've heard good things about, so that could be worth, looking at potentially. And then there are a few other ones on here that I'm just not that familiar with. And then next we got the best distressed debt buyer, and the winner there was Colonial Funding Group. I'm not really sure what they mean by like the best buyer, but we had folks like Colonial Funding Group on here, Aspen Funds, Keyhole Financial, Kirkland, NNG, PPR, and Revolve. I know a lot of these entities are people you can go and buy from. And Colonial, like I already mentioned earlier, run by Bob Repass. I haven't bought from them. I haven't transacted with them specifically, but from everything I've seen, it seems to be a very squared away operation and run by people that I trust. Now, this next one is really interesting and it's kind of near and dear to my heart, and it's the best financial calculator. So the nominees were Excel, two different Hewlett Packard calculators, Texas Instruments. I assume they're talking about calculator, and this T-value software. And the winner was the HP 10 BII calculator. And this, I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about this one. So for me, if you follow me, right, like I have videos on my YouTube channel where I talk about how to use Excel for notes. You can also use Google Sheets. It's a spreadsheet. It's the same thing. But I know a lot of people out there like to use a good old-fashioned financial calculator. I find that to be a really terrible, terrible idea for a number of reasons. Um, One, using a spreadsheet, whether it's Excel or Google Sheets or whatever, is not any more complicated than using a financial calculator. It's dirt simple. And it comes with a lot of other advantages that an old-fashioned calculator does not. For example, if you're using a calculator, you can't really save your analysis and go back to it and make adjustments like you can in a spreadsheet. You got to punch everything in again. You also can't easily create scenarios. One of the things I like to do is build spreadsheets that leverage the financial equations and then play around with pricing. Hey, if I make this offer, what's my return? What can I bid up to get another return if someone comes back and does a counter offer? Whereas with a financial calculator, you got to punch all those things in one by one, and you lose all the advantages of the spreadsheet. Also, if you make a typo, a lot of times you're going back and doing things over again in the calculator. And really, these are like point calculations. So a lot of times in my spreadsheets, I'll have a financial calculation that might be calculating a yield that feeds into something else. So when you use a spreadsheet, there's just a lot more flexibility, a lot more things you can do with no increase in difficulty. I mean, to me, using a financial calculator, and I realize I'm going to offend some people because this is like the way that most people do it. So, like most people listening to it probably use the financial calculator. But for me, it's like if I need to get to somewhere 10 miles away, using the financial calculator is like taking a horse and buggy versus just taking a car. Yeah, it'll get you there. Absolutely. But is it going to get you there as easily, as cheaply in terms of your time? Hell no, not even close. So as I look at my content that I'm putting together for 2023, I think I'm going to go back and revisit some of the using Excel and using spreadsheets for notes. Those were actually some of the first videos I created a few years ago. And so I may go back and try to update those and show why it's no more difficult than a financial calculator and a heck of a lot easier, more flexible, and just allows you to do so many more things. So yeah, if you can't tell, I'm a little bit grossed out that in 2022, about to be 2023, people are still using financial calculators. I mean, I just don't get it. It's like watching TV in black and white, or I don't know what. To me, it's kind of absurd. It's not the 1950s. You don't have to do that. There's so many better options which are free. So I'll stop ranting about that. Next, we've got the best BPO valuation service. The winner here was Baldwin Advisory Group, or BAG. So this is Dickie Baldwin, who's been on the podcast a couple times. He's the guy that I use for my BPOs. They are very good. He's got a big network of vendors and realtors that can put these together for you. I also use them increasingly for property condition reports. So sometimes I just want to know the condition of the property. I don't necessarily need a full-blown BPO. So one scenario could be if I'm looking at a loan that has a lot of equity where I'm not so much concerned about the specific value. I just want to know the condition. And then where I've also been using Baldwin Advisory Group a lot, especially recently, is for these property condition reports for assets that are going through foreclosure. So some of these I want to know, these are notes, some of them I bought a few years ago. So I'm like, I want to get a more recent look at the property to see how it's doing before I start the foreclosure process. And then now too, as we are in the wintertime, I want to know if the borrower's left the property. When you're doing foreclosures in the winter, one of the things you got to keep an eye on is see if the borrowers are still there or not. Because if a borrower decides, hey, I'm giving this up, I'm just going to take off, number one, they're probably not going to tell you. And number two, they're probably not going to winterize the property before they go. So you can get into frozen pipes and things like that, depending on what part of the country you're in. So yeah, they've definitely been very solid for me. Number of other vendors on here as well. There's really no shortage of BPO vendors out there. One of the other ones listed is NVMS. I haven't used them for BPOs per se, but I have started using them in the last year for door knocker services and a few other kind of miscellaneous or REO services, and they've really done well by me so far. So that's been great. Next, we have the best title report company in the winter was Pro Title USA. This is also the company that I use for my title reports. Baldwin Advisory Group will do it as well. But when I started doing these, I started using Pro Title, and they've always been really good. If I have questions on things, they're very helpful. If something shows up on a title report that's a little bit unusual or something I don't quite understand, and the other thing they'll do too is if you need to update title, like let's say um, the seller pulled a title report from Pro Title not that long ago, a lot of times you can pull a Delta report if it's within a certain amount of time and they don't charge you the full price, which is kind of nice. So I found that to be very customer friendly as well. Best property insurance company. So for property insurance, we're talking about force placed insurance when the borrower doesn't have it. Where I can, I try to actually just do this through the loan servicer. You can pay a little more doing it that way, but it can also simplify things a bit because when the loan servicer does it, they automatically add it to the loan as a charge and they track it, and it can make life more simple. The winner here was JB Lloyd and Associates, which I think is probably like the most popular one for force place insurance. Haven't actually used them directly, but I've heard good things about them. The one on this list that I generally use when I need it is Ross Diversified Insurance Services. I've heard anecdotally that Ross is more expensive than some of the other options. However, I've stuck with them because they're such a reliable and quick responding vendor. So when I need to get a quote or turn on force place insurance, I send them an email. I always get a response back very quickly. Like everything's very snappy. Things don't fall through the cracks. They're just really, really, really easy to work with. One of my best vendors, really, from a performance standpoint. So I've been super happy with them. Then we get into legal services. This is kind of an interesting category because it's really so broad. Like if you look at the nominees on this list, some of them do different types of legal services. The winner was Jeff Watson, who I don't know personally. I've heard him speak a number of times. I think I'm going to try to get him on the podcast at some point next year. I've heard a lot of great things about him. Some of the other notable nominees on the list, Caballero Lender Services. That's George Caballero, who I've not hired him directly for legal services, but he's helped me out with some referrals for attorneys in different states that were new to me where I didn't have an attorney. Um, Met him face to face in the past. Seems like a very good guy. I know he's been very helpful to me on a number of occasions. Aaron Quinn, who handles Georgia and Florida, is really, really good. Um, so Till and Barilli, who's personally my favorite law office. So they handle all of my stuff in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. They cover a couple of other states as well, have been really good to me. And then the one on here that's a little different um, was KKOS lawyers. So they do more like business entity setup and things like that rather than processing foreclosures or doing document reviews or things like that. They're actually the ones that I used when I converted my business from an LLC to an S corp. And they were good at doing that. Um, and I know a lot of their clients, some of my friends use them and rave about them. My experience was a little mixed. I felt like they were always coming back and trying to sell me more services that I kind of thought I had already bought. Um, so I would say my experience there was middle of the road overall. And then there's a bunch of other attorneys on here. I won't go through all of them, some of which I'm not familiar with. Best accountants and tax advisors. So the winner here was John Heyer. I don't have experience with any of these on the list, although I would say if you do need uh, a tax person, definitely check out this list. Finding a tax person that help you with notes can be really challenging. I know this from experience. Back a few years ago, I had somebody who was really good. She retired. Someone from her firm took over. That person was absolutely terrible. I ended up having to fire them and do my own taxes that year. And then when I converted my business to an S corp, I couldn't do them myself anymore. And I hired a person who completely crapped the bed on me. Um, had to let her go, had to file an extension because it wasn't done in time, and then found out later that she didn't. I can't remember which one it was, but she only filed for, so I had to do taxes for myself and then the business entity, and she only filed the extension for one of those. So I got hit by a penalty from the IRS, and then eventually found a local person here in Colorado who was able to help me out and get those filed, who was phenomenal, not necessarily somebody who does notes specifically, but it was just a good enough general purpose tax attorney to get everything done quickly. So this is something that can definitely be a pain point. If you don't have somebody lined up for 2023, I would get on that now, because the other thing that I encountered when I was trying to get someone to do my taxes this past year when I needed someone new was a lot of the people I contacted said, we're not accepting new clients, we're full, whatever. So that can be a challenge. So if you do need a tax person, I would definitely get on that sooner as opposed to later. Because once, especially as we get into the spring and they get into the throes of tax season, it can be really challenging. This next one I found pretty interesting. So the best marketing method for finding notes, the winner was networking and referrals. I definitely agree with this. This is where I find most all of my deals, especially my best ones, are just through my network that I've built over several years. I thought some of the other nominees were kind of interesting. Craigslist. I've never tried this. I'm not sure how that would work for buying notes. That doesn't seem like it would be a good option. Direct mail was on here. I know some of the people who specialize in buying seller finance notes still do that to a degree. When I was at the Paper Source conference, when was it, last April? Jeff Armstrong talked about, how he's done a lot of that in the past. And then social media and websites. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, networking and referrals is really the best way to find notes, without a doubt. And it's a challenge because it takes a little bit of time to do that. But once you do it, people in your network who know what you buy, when they know you're reliable, they will find you when they have deals. And so that makes life easy. Um, the best note analyzer and tracking tool here, the winner was Note Unlimited. And again, this is one of those categories where I haven't used any of the nominees. Well, that's not totally true, actually. So we had Note Unlimited, Note Pros. I messed around with Note Pros a little bit, but this was like 3 years ago. I don't know if the software is even the same as then. I did some trials. Note Rules, the JKP Portal Due Diligence Tool, NPL Manager. I can't remember his name now, but I talked to the guy who does NPL Manager at a conference the other year. Um, I haven't tried any of these. The main reason is I think most note investors have their own specific way that they like to track their portfolios. That's why I do a lot of stuff with, some of it's with spreadsheets. I use Pipedrive to do a lot of my tracking. Pipedrive isn't really a note tracking tool. It's a CRM, which we'll get to here pretty shortly, customer relationship manager that I've kind of bastardized to use towards notes. So I find these software tools, kind of tough because this is such a niche market that we're in, and a lot of people want to do things their own way. Anyhow, I mean, for God's sakes, if everybody's out there using freaking HP calculators, like, are they really? I don't know how many get neck deep into these software packages. Best CRM for note investors. So this again, this is customer relationship manager. A CRM is typically in the wider industry, it's a software tool people usually use to manage sales leads and sales funnels. But they usually use it to manage, contacts, email their lists, things like that. And the winner was Infusionsoft. This really surprised me. I've never used Infusionsoft, but it's a very expensive and complicated piece of software. So again, I can't imagine how many people are actually using this. I know of one guy in the industry who uses Infusionsoft for his stuff. Renowned scammer and thief. Maybe that's where he gets the money to pay the licensing fee. I don't know. But that one is, like I said, I've never used it firsthand, but it's a pretty complicated tool. And I don't think there are too many people out there with no businesses to the scale that really justify Infusionsoft. Some of the other ones on here were interesting, like ClickFunnels. ClickFunnels is really, it's like a funnel management software for doing sales and like leading people through an online sales funnel to do like e-commerce and things like that. It's created by this guy named Russell Brunson. Um, and they have a little bit of CRM functionality, but that's not really what it does. So it kind of surprises me to see that on there. MailChimp, which isn't really a CRM, like it has some of those capabilities. MailChimp is good if you are starting out and you just want to do some basic like email marketing. That's what I started out with. Um, Pipedrive, which I use, I don't actually use it so much as my CRM. I actually use it more as a bastardized um, note tracking tool and kind of project management tool. Um, what I do use for contacts in my email list is one called ActiveCampaign, which is not on here. ActiveCampaign is good software. I might actually be moving away from it though. And then next year, that's one of these other things I'm working on as we get to the end of the year. I might be mixing up some of the software stack that I use. And then last nominee and CRMs was Salesforce, which is an enterprise level tool. Really expensive. Like I don't know why any note investor would use Salesforce. I don't quite get that one. The best social media platform for note professionals. So Facebook one, that's no shock. There are several good note investing related Facebook groups that I'm a part of. There's a lot of good discussion, a lot of different places you can go on there and ask questions if you run into something new, and someone knowledgeable will usually respond. They also listed like Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Those aren't, I mean, there's a little bit of real estate stuff that happens on those. But yeah, for notes in particular, Facebook is definitely the place to be. And then the best of those groups was the Creating Wealth Simplified Facebook group. So this is one run by Chris Sevigny. It used to be called Notes and Bolts, Good Deeds, something like that beforehand. Um, and there's a lot of good folks on there. Actually, this has kind of been my go-to Facebook group for note stuff for a while, or just to talk notes. Although honestly, these days I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be. Some of the other options on here that stand out is the Financial Friends Network from Walter Wooford. Um, I'm part of that. I don't log on there nearly as much as I should. It's more of a general real estate group. They do talk about notes. It's not really note specific. But Walter's another guy I should have on the podcast one time. Really good guy. There was one deal that I had in Jackson, Mississippi, where he helped me out with some eyes on the ground. Super nice guy, super good guy. That's definitely worth checking out as well, especially if you're doing other kinds of real estate in addition to notes. Best podcast and shows for note investors. Sadly, the Note Investor podcast did not win. It was nominated. The winner was Note School TV from Eddie Speed. And I have not listened to this show. It's funny because I spend so much time neck deep in notes. I don't listen to note investing podcasts, like not even my own, because I kind of get my fill of it elsewhere. Um, but I'm sure this is a good show. I mean, Eddie Speed obviously knows his stuff. And there's a lot of note school people out there. So not super shocked that that one. The other one I'll call out is the Creating Wealth Simplified. So this is Chris Sevigny and Lauren Wells. One, they get a lot of interesting guests on there as well. Um, and then Best Note Industry Convention. The winner was Note Expo. So this is another one put on by Eddie Speed. And Note School, I've been to it a couple of times, was not able to make it the last couple years. This is really, in my opinion, it is, I think it's like the biggest note investing related conference, probably. Also one of the best ones for beginners. I know when I very first started at Notes and I was kind of in that phase of like doing research and looking into it, I was like, well, I want to meet some of these characters face to face before I actually dive into this industry. And the first place I showed up was the Note Expo conference. If you're a little more experienced, then you might not have as much a need for the content. You would be there more for the networking, although a lot of people show up at this. So it's really awesome for networking as well. Happens in the fall, so you're gonna have to wait until next November to do this one again. But it's a really, really good conference, one that I've been to a few times. And then there's the online Cashflow Expo conference. I believe that's coming up in February. That's one that Fred and Tracy Rui run. I caught a little bit of that last year. It's very, very good. And I just got asked to speak at that this year. So I'm a little biased now towards that one. But I'll be putting together a session for that. What's really great about that is I believe it's online. And if you watch it live, it's actually free. And then I think you pay if you want to get the videos afterwards. So it's kind of nice because you don't really have to spend any money or spend much money. You don't have to travel and do all that other stuff if you want like really good high quality content. And they're very strict about there's no selling in that as well. Like you can get sometimes at conferences. Node Expo doesn't have selling in it either. But I think Cashflow Expo is one that's coming up in the near term that's worth checking out. There's IMN defaulted notes. They usually run one in the spring. This is one where I've been a panel speaker before. Don't necessarily recommend this for beginners. IMN is a little higher level, tends to be very expensive, and it's maybe a better conference when you're playing at a bigger level. And then Paper Source was the one I went to for the first time this last year in Las Vegas. Really enjoyed that conference. A lot of really good stuff there. That crowd was, versus say like Node Expo, definitely very experienced. Like met some guys who have been doing notes since back to the 70s. Um, I've always enjoyed talking to older folks who have been around the block for decades, and it was really fascinating talking to some of these folks about the ups and downs in the economic cycles over decades. And it gets back to my advice to like play a very long game. A lot of those folks there have played a very long game, a lot of interesting people to learn from. All right, so that's what we've got this year for the best of notes. Again, look forward to putting out a lot more content, being a lot more consistent over 2023. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about as we head into the new year. Hopes everyone has a great holiday season, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.